Well, this Q&A is especially meaningful to me because Mark Joseph isn't just the producer of Reagan. He's been one of my closest friends for more than 30 years. Long before Dennis Quaid put on the suit, before the cameras rolled, before there was a screenplay, Mark and I were sitting in a sushi bar in La Mirada, California, talking about a dream that seemed almost impossible at the time. Tonight, you just watched the finished film, the director's cut. What I'd love to do is pull back the curtain and let you hear the story behind the story from the man who birthed this dream and led it all the way to the silver screen. My good friend, Mark Joseph, glad to have you with us tonight. Wish you were here in person, but glad to have you virtually, brother.
Well, thanks, guys. I'm there with you in spirit, and it's great to join you guys tonight.
I would like to jump right in. Would like to go back to 2015. We've been noodling on this project for a decade. That sushi restaurant in La Mirada, it's the first place I think I ever had eel. You brought out a whole medley of things for me to try and said you're
That's
going to
right.
love it, and I did.
Good
The
memory.
vision you, huh?
Good memory.
Yeah, the vision you shared with me that day, I remember you had actually visited with President Reagan, which was just wild to me, as I believed that served as big inspiration moment for this project. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit because you've got photos of it. It sounds like a wild encounter.
Well, since I'm here with a lot of your church folks, I can talk, a little bit more about that angle of it. But I'll just say that I think it's a good thing that when God sends us on journeys, He doesn't tell us the outcome, or we would all just say no, thank you. If He had said to me, "My son, I want you to make a movie about Ronald Reagan. It's going to take you 19 years." I would have said, with all due respect, sir, I'm going to take a pass on that. Can you have somebody else do that, please? But he doesn't do that, right? He just gives you a day at a time, and we can handle the day. Maybe he can't even handle 2 days sometimes, but he can handle a day. And I think that's just the way that he teaches us to trust him and be obedient and do things that we wouldn't ordinarily want to do. So I think it's true for a lot of things in our lives. There are things that if we had known, we probably would have tried to get out of it. But yeah, I did meet him in 1997, and of course, I had no inkling that I was going to make a movie about this man someday, and just had a chance to spend I don't know 10, 15 minutes with him in his offices. He already had Alzheimer's at that point. But it's always helpful. I mean, rarely in these cases do you get to meet the subject of your biopic, so that was kind of cool, and she get a sense of the man and spend a few minutes and take a picture with him. And if you have the book, it's on the back of the book. And so that's where not exactly where it started, but where it started was I worked for Walden Media from 2000 to 2005. We made some great movies like the Ray Charles movie Ray and the Chronicles of Narnia and Holes. But I always thought about Reagan, but our owner at the time didn't have any interest in that. And right about the time that I left Walden, I was pulled over for speeding in Illinois. I was going to a cousin's wedding. I think maybe coming back from a cousin's wedding. And I was pulled over for speeding. And, I mean, I'm not a perfect man who never speeds, but I was with my wife and I believe 3 daughters at the time, little girls. And we're in a minivan. So, how fast can I be going? And I pulled over for speeding, and the officer, I think he was a rookie officer. I noticed his hands were kind of shaking, a little nervous, writing out the ticket for me. And he was like, "You're in big trouble, basically. You've got to appear in court in person. You can't just write a check. You got to come back a month from now." And I'm like, "A month from now? What in the world?" Not to be a wise guy from Los Angeles, but, I can't fly back and I just pay the ticket. I'm not saying I didn't do it, but it was one of those speed traps. It was 55 or 45, then 65. And anyway, so he goes, no, no, this is like very serious. You have to appear in court. He says, maybe I can move it up to tomorrow. And I don't know if y'all remember the Seinfeld episode where they end up in jail, the last episode. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like, this could be really bad. And so anyway, I have to spend the night. Well, I look at the ticket and it says on it, you must appear in court in Dixon, Illinois. And I know enough about Ronald Reagan that that's the hometown. That's his hometown, basically. So I've got to spend the night in Ronald Reagan's hometown to fight a traffic ticket the next day. And you can't make this stuff up. And so we're stuck there for a day. And I'm not saying there isn't a lot happening in Dixon, but I think I looked around, I saw like a gas station, a Pizza Hut, and a Holiday Inn nearby. And that was about it. But we just decided to use the day, and I went around. We went to see Reagan's house he grew up in. We saw the river where he was a lifeguard, and I think in the middle of that, somehow I got my not walking papers, my direction. You're supposed to make a movie about this guy, and so that's where it all started. Against my will, I was stuck in Ronald Reagan's hometown for a night, and somewhere along the way, that became the impetus to make this movie.
And then that would have been 14 or 15, 2014. What year was
I,
that?
I wish.
2000,
That was
it was earlier.
2006, 2005 or
2000,
6.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot longer than a decade. We've been working together on it a decade, but you were noodling on it much sooner and starting to put the legs under the table, it sounds like.
Right.
When you first announced the project, did you obviously, from what you just said, didn't have any idea how difficult the road would be. Um, but I know where the film storyline started, it changed significantly to what landed in front of the public. I'm trying to think. I was trying to remember. I've been at screenings with you. We've been at Dick Clark's studios together. I'm just trying to think, but I know several of my team have been at screenings with you. But I know all along from the very first logos and website we did, the storyline that you were telling me was different than what it ended up, and it just seemed to develop along the way. Was it constantly being just dialed in with feedback, or was there, did you hit a point and you go, I'm going to go a complete different direction with this story?
Yeah, we hired a first writer who did a first draft, and that was okay, but it wasn't great. So we hired a second writer, and I just hired this second writer, and again, to just kind of on the spiritual aspects of things, just hired the second writer, and it was obviously on my mind, and went to sleep, and I dreamed. Basically, the first 10 minutes of what you all saw tonight was in my dream, almost exactly the way you saw it. And I remember, I'm not a person who remembers my dreams, generally speaking, despite the fact that my name is Joseph. I wake up the next morning and I can't remember anything I've dreamed, unless something happens that day that reminds me of it, which is kind of a blessing because, who knows what we dream at night. But I woke up, I remember after I saw this dream of the opening of the movie, I remember having the presence of mind to say, if you don't wake up and write this down, you will never remember this in the morning. So I woke myself up and I wrote the entire thing as I saw it, and I sent it to my new writer who I just hired, Howard Klossner, who wrote Space Cowboys, a great writer. And I sent it with kind of fear and trepidation because the last thing you want to do, as a manager of things and people is micromanage people. I don't like to do that at all. I like to just say, go do you, and come back with a great script. So I said, Howie, sorry to do this to you, but what do you think about this idea? And the whole thing about the KGB agent and being visited by a Russian, that whole opening. And luckily he said, this is great, let's run with this. And so he took that 10 minutes and then made it into a movie. So I'm really thankful, first of all, that I woke myself up. But yeah, there is an element of inspiration that we just can't account for. An atheist would say, well, he was just thinking about it when he went to sleep. But a Christian would say, yeah, God, gave you that idea. And so I wish I could take credit for it, but all I can take credit for is waking myself up and writing it down.
Well, it turned out fantastic. You and I were constantly talking through this along the way, working through things, Lots of logo variations, lots of movie poster variations. We deployed a couple websites along the way.
Yep.
Did I honestly never lost faith because there's too many things we've done that seemed nutty that happened. But at any point, did you think this thing ever going to get made, or did you just stay focused and we're going to get this thing done?
Oh yeah, I had doubts. I mean, there was no doubt about it. And I would often think, there was one person who had very early on invested, and I just always felt like, oh man, if I have to go back to him and say, I'm really sorry, sir, but I've lost your money and it's not going to happen, that was always in the back of my mind. And just we all naturally question like God's timing and did I mishear you or did I make a mistake along the way? I think that's always part of the deal. And the thing is, there were always ways to do it along the way that would have compromised my ability to tell the story the way I wanted to. I would have offers time to time. I had a producer come to me and say, I have a deal with Netflix. If you'll sell it to me, I can sell it to Netflix. But then I would have lost control of it. And I always told my team, I would rather not make it than make a bad version because this is very easy to screw up. There's 1,000 ways to mess this up. And I understood the story better than anybody else. So I just didn't trust it in the hands of, certainly my friends in Hollywood would have messed it up. And it's very easy to mess this story up. And, he has, the challenge is he has these hardcore fans you don't want to disappoint. At the same time, you don't want to tell the story about a perfect man and make everything perfect. And so you really have to thread that needle really carefully. And so the movie is full of flaws, but they're not mean-spirited. We're not doing it in a mean-spirited way. He's a 50-year-old washed-up actor who's divorced with 2 kids, sitting in a park bench telling his mom, you said I was going to be somebody great. He's in Vegas at the lowest point of his career, throwing a beer bottle against the marquee because he's so disappointed with the way his life has turned out. So, yeah, don't believe the people who say, we made a perfect movie about a perfect person. Not at all. We just made it in a way that wasn't mean-spirited, but we all have had those moments in our lives, right?
Sure.
We've all had those throw the beer bottle at the marquee moments where it's like, yeah, my life just didn't turn out like I thought it was going to. I know that even thinking about your life, you had rock star dreams, and yet God had those as the launching pad for the other things you were supposed to do.
Sure.
I mean, you did the rock star thing for a while, but I'm just saying you didn't become Bon Jovi because that wasn't the plan, right? But at the time, you were probably had disappointments. We've all had those moments, and so, yeah, this movie, we tried to make this the all-American story of the man who faces great disappointments in his life, but then he has the comeback moment.
Wonderful. What was the hardest challenge audiences never knew about? I remember, you were doing this in the midst of the pandemic. There were just lots of hurdles that never made it to the Hollywood Reporter or Variety. It never made it to the press. Like, what were the challenges that really were like slamming the brakes on you?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote about this in my book, Making Reagan, quite a bit. A lot of people who didn't keep their commitments. That was probably the biggest thing. The most humorous of all was my friend Dick Riordan, who was the mayor of Los Angeles, who has since passed away, so I can tell a funny story on him. But, Dick was very, very wealthy, hundreds of millions of dollars. So he said, Mark, I'm in for $5 million. He goes, but I need a favor from you. And I'm like, okay, what can I do in exchange for the $5 million? He goes, I want you to find this certain bottle of whiskey that I can't find in America. And I know you know Japan very well, so I want you to find it for me. So I'm like, okay, so I start calling around my friends in Japan, and nobody has this bottle of whiskey. It's going to be in production. It's going to take 5 years to get a bottle of this. This is why Dick wants it so bad. So I finally found, through my connections, a politician in Japan who has 2 bottles, and he says, yeah, I'll give you one. So I'm in Japan. You can picture this. I'm in the airport in Japan with my 4 or 5 little children under the age of 10, whatever it was. And I open up my suitcase at customs, like, Dad, why do you have a bottle of whiskey? I'm like, never mind, kids. Your dad has become an international bootlegger to raise money for the Reagan film. So I give Dick the bottle he needed, and he reneged on his $5 million offer. So things like that happened often. And so you just had to roll with it. So he got his whiskey, and I didn't get my 5 million.
Well, you embrace people along the way that live up to what they say. They are a rare breed. Um, all along the way, we were constantly talking. You were sending me links, texting me links, giving me updates. When Dennis Quaid agreed to play Reagan, what was your reaction when you got the word? Because you kept dropping early some of the people that were signing on early of the project and sending me links that was hitting the media out there on the West Coast. But what was your reaction when you knew he was in?
Yeah, his agent at the time was not a fan, and so he passed without informing Dennis about the movie, which by law you're required to bring every offer to your talent. So when that happened, fortunately, I went to a mutual friend who knew Dennis. And Dennis, I didn't even hear about this. This sounds really interesting. And so that's what got us back on track. And with Dennis, and again, I write this more at length in the book if you're interested. By the way, I tell people that if you have a young person in your life who wants to be a filmmaker, give him my book and you can talk him out of it and convince them to do something sensible like dentistry or even in the ministry, being a pastor or something, something marketable and something that doesn't quite have the ups and downs. Well, being a pastor is tough too. But anyway, Dennis, I took him out to dinner, and we talked about this role, and I gave him my pitch, and he said, "Let me think about it. I'll get back to you." So he calls me about a week or two later. My phone lights up. Dennis Quaid calling, and he's an actor, so with great dramatic flair, he said, "Mark, I tried that cowboy hat you gave me on the replica cowboy hat. Just doesn't fit a Reagan's cowboy hat." And I thought, oh man. He goes, "But I think I can grow into it." And so he spent the next several years growing into it and becoming Ronald Reagan. So I was so grateful for Dennis stepping up and taking the role.
Well, what surprised you about his preparation? Because I know that when I heard he was in, I was like, how is this going to translate? But then when you get to the silver screen, he does translate and he does step into those shoes. Like, what was the prep like for him? I'm sure you were in on that.
Watched a lot of YouTube videos of Reagan. He met with people like Reagan's Secret Service agent, heard his stories. And then on the set, I would take some videos of Dennis as Reagan and I would text them to some of Reagan's aides and say, "Hey, how are we doing?" And I remember one of his aides said, he's playing him from the mouth and not the chest. He's got to play him more from the chest and not just out here. Things like that. So I think I think for the most part, we really nailed it. We have a lot of criticism of the movie from the critic class and the elites. But even they will say Dennis did a good job. So even the nasty reviews generally say Dennis Quaid did a great job, however, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And so I know the criticism is more of a political nature.
Yeah, tonight's audience saw scenes nobody saw in the theatrical release. It really seemed like throughout this project, timing was everything. All the way throughout the conversations we were having. So, what was it always in the playbook to drop the director's cut at the peak of America's 250? Because it seems like that's perfect.
Nothing is timed the way that I would have timed it. We just have to follow. Reagan used to tell his aide, there's always a DP, the divine plan. So none of this was my plan. Dennis and I used to say we never want this to come out in an election year. Yeah, because naturally we want both Republicans and Democrats to watch it.
Right.
In an election year, Democrats are going to tend to stay away from it. So, of course, we came out in the middle of an election year. We were contractually obligated to have it up by a certain date, or we would face severe penalties. And so we had to put it out. And when this opportunity rolled around of the 250th, I just thought, let's make a special version that people will come back to the theaters. And so that's our plan. And you guys had a sneak peek tonight, but we'll be out September 18th. So I hope that your folks will come out again. But this is a time for when you think about even a phrase like "Make America Great Again," that comes originally from Jimmy Carter, by the way. Jimmy Carter said it first. Reagan repeated it. Bill Clinton said it. Obama kind of said it. And then Trump said it. So, that's a phrase that we should all be able to unite around. And
Sure.
certainly the president was smart enough to trademark it. That's Donald Trump's genius for you. But it really should be all of our goals to make America great and make America good. And so I hope in this 250th that we could all, rally around the things we agree on.
Absolutely. The uh, two-part question. Is there a favorite scene, and was there a scene you hated cutting?
Oh,
That
yeah,
didn't
sure.
even make that, yeah,
Well, I really liked, I liked a lot of scenes. I cry at my own movies. So, in fact, yesterday I was sitting with one of our editors, and she was crying in the edit bay as we were getting it ready. Um, what was my favorite scene? I really resonate with the mother and son scene walking down the street. I sort of cribbed some things from my mother, things that she used to say to us. She would often say, there's a plan for your life, and she would say, there's something only you can do. And so I gave that line in the movie to Reagan's mother. And I also gave the line to his mother where she says, remember whose you are and whom you serve, which I thought was my mother's original line, but turns out it's from an Oswald Chambers daily reading book that my mother cribbed it from. So these things get passed around and they eventually end up in a movie. The scenes that I was sad to cut was we had to cut a lot of childhood out. Um, just wasn't working for the theatrical. Now, I think one day we'll release it as a miniseries and put a lot of that back in. But we had a lot of young Reagan as a child with his teenage crush, um, just different things, proposing to his girlfriend. She dumps him. All these backstories that are in there somewhere. And one day we'll put it out as a miniseries.
yeah, I look forward to that. There's definitely a lot of content for sure. Um, the film exceeded box office expectations, grossing 30.1 million worldwide on its initial release and became a major home entertainment success. Yet the critics, the audience, is one of the largest gaps in movie history. What do you make of this? I mean,
Yeah.
it's astounding. You came up against Wolverine and other things at the box office. It's just a remarkable reflection of the product and the project.
We beat Deadpool and Wolverine on the eighth day, so we were number one on day eight, which is interesting midweek. 'Cause a lot of our fans are older. But yeah, we have the greatest gap in history, 81 points between critics and fans, and we are hounding Guinness World Book of Records to give us the official designation. The previous record was 65, so we beat it by 16 points. And look, we have fun with it. Your audience is very, very smart. They know exactly what's going on. The Rotten Tomatoes does not recognize certain publications, like for instance, Plugged In, Movie Guide. These publications are not recognized because of these groups' positions on certain political issues. So it's yeah. Anyway, if a movie is 98% with people that watched it and 17% with critics, I think we all know what's going on there. We need more diversity in the film criticism world. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, Popcorn Meter had it at 98%. And, the moviegoer at the end of the day, we always heard that, critics and reviewers get their product free a lot of times. And, you care about those who pay to come through the door. So,
Well, my favorite run was one of the critics was honest enough to say that he left after 20 minutes and he still wrote the review. So I appreciate the honesty in that one at least. I think a lot of that was going on too.
sure. So, you know, we grew up in that era of the program Behind the Music. And you and I are both music guys at heart. That's what brought us together back in the 80s. And that's a whole nother podcast or an interview we'll do. You and I could do 1,000 podcasts over the journey. But I mean, I remember you buying me Japanese releases and sending them to me when we were younger in our teenage years.
Right.
But but we can't talk about this film without talking about the music, the soundtrack, beyond memorable, beyond unexpected, what you pulled together. Bob Dylan sings Cole Porter. Gene Simmons covers the 1930 standard Stormy Weather. Phil Keaggy doing Guns N' Roses. Gary Sharon from Extreme and Van Halen recording a new song altogether. Clint Black doing John Denver. And you can't not talk about Molly Jensen's awesome ethereal rendition of Everybody Wants to Rule the World. I mean, that's always, you've always had that music bend, and even with the Passion soundtrack and things, just talk about how you pulled this all together. And I leaned over to my wife and said, that's Scott Stapp from Creed playing Sinatra. I mean, all the stops were pulled. It was cool.
Well, man, of course, all I can think about is the things that didn't happen. You're saying the things that did happen.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was supposed to happen was Brezhnev was going to be at the table with Soviet generals on both sides. And one was going to be Alice Cooper and Dave Mustaine of Megadeth. And who was the other one? Three of my rock star friends. Yeah, Alice and Dave. So that would have been fun. They would had to have their hair tucked in, and their cat hats or whatever. But yeah, when I was putting together the soundtrack, obviously music is very important to me, into this film and the 80s. And so I just put the call out to all the great bands from the 80s to today just to see who would respond, and I don't know who's going to respond. I used to have on my wall here, I had a list of 60 artists that I wanted. And if you had asked me back then, hey, Mark, which artists do you think will be the most difficult to get? Without a doubt, I would have said Kiss and Bob Dylan, rather than all the other 60, 58 artists. And sure enough, Bob and Gene were the ones that came through as I was being turned down by lesser artists, So it was kind of surreal. It was very interesting and weird. And I just never knew who was going to say yes, who was going to say no. The Commodores, hey, we're in, but at the same time, it's like Hall & Oates. Yeah, they're fighting each other. They're never going to do a song together. Sorry, you're out. That would have been a great 80s catch for me.
For sure.
But we ended up with who we ended up with. It was supposed to be. And so it was a lot of fun. There were some that didn't quite make it to the finish line. Alice Cooper had done a demo for me about the last ride, the last horse ride, that we just couldn't get over the finish line. So there were some defeats and some victories along the way. But yeah, what a fun, eclectic group we ended up with. So we have two soundtracks, and for your fans or your friends in the audience, we actually have an LP and a CD of both soundtracks because it's the 80s. And so one is the songs that were in the film, and the other is songs inspired by the film. And so Tanya Tucker, the Commodores, Travis Tritt, all these great artists watched the movie, then wrote a song that kind of the way they were inspired to write a song.
Wonderful. That's awesome. We've worked together for over 30 years. This project was very unique, a true passion project. As you know, I also loved Reagan. I wrote him a letter when he was shot, and he wrote this letter back to me. Which
What year was that?
This was 87. He wrote me back, and I wrote it. He was shot in, do you know what year he was shot in? Because I got
80,
that.
81, yeah.
Yeah, and the letter came much later, and I remember when we got to the Reagan Library, because they're partners of ours, as you know. We both work with the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, but Joanna there, who was President Reagan's aide, she looked at it and she goes, "He was always good to respond. That's what he did." But he was our president. We grew up with him, and we never seemed to stop running to support this project. Of all the projects we've collaborated on, we've done No Safe Spaces with Adam Carolla and Dennis Prager, worked on some things for God's Not Dead 2 because of Gracia. What made this one different? This one seemed different from the get-go for both of us. And I mean, we were men on a mission to get this to the finish line, and lots of hurdles. And you never got a no from me when you rang. I was like, we're on it. We'll get it together, So was it just, it was personal because it was our president, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you have a letter from him, my wife has a letter from him when she was a teenager. I have two letters from him. It's very odd. Like it's not normal for teenagers to write their president. So I think he was just very close. We felt like he was our grandpa. And
Right.
so my wife, when she was like 12, she writes the president and says, "Can you please come to my house for dinner in Fargo, North Dakota?" I mean, it's a little weird, but who does that? Well, a lot of us did that, and it was just very normal for us to invite him over for dinner. And he wrote a nice letter back saying why he couldn't make it to dinner in Fargo, but he appreciated her writing, and you have one, and I have one as well. So it was a very unique situation that, yes, he was strongly disliked by a part of the population. And even in my growing up in my class, I had friends who hated him and their parents hated him. But most of us, we saw that he was sincere. Even if you disagree with him, he was sincere
Right.
and he was a good man. And so, it's a good role model for us. And we're in these times now where it's like things are very even more polarized, if you can believe it. And we've lost that sense of camaraderie that, hey, even even if we disagree, we're still Americans, and we've lost that. So we need to regain that, and I hope our movie can play a role in that. Reagan used to say to Tip O'Neill, "Is it 6 p.m.?" Is his nemesis, his Democratic opponent, "Is it 6 p.m. yet?" And O'Neill would say, "What does it matter if it's 6 p.m.? Let's finish this discussion we're having." And he said, "Well, if it's 6 p.m., we're friends again, and we can stop arguing and fighting. We argue until 6, and then we take a break." And we've lost that sense. We're fighting
Right.
24 hours now instead of till 6 p.m. And I think we have to especially be aware that there are a lot of nations around the world who truly are evil and want to destroy us. And if they can get us to destroy each other, then they don't have to do the work of destroying us. They can just destroy us from within. So I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, we're still all Americans. We settle our differences with elections and different things, but at the end of the day, we're on the same team.
Yeah, there wasn't a far right, there wasn't a far left. Everybody was a little bit closer to center, and even the debates were comical at times between the two factions. One of my favorite memories throughout this process, you called me. We had decided to do Thanksgiving away, and we did it in Nashville. And on Thanksgiving, you called me and you said, "I've got this crazy opportunity. Uh, I need to get a movie poster done, and we're going to get it on Pawn Stars, and we've got to move fast." So I
Right.
called back to Ohio and said, "Can I get somebody into the office? Can you put something together?" We got it emailed out to a place in Vegas to print it so you could pick it up so we could land on that Thanksgiving, coming out of Thanksgiving, and show up and do that episode, which you can find online on YouTube
Give
and
it to our
whatnot.
friend Robert Sweet.
That's right. And but the poster, what people need to understand is the poster that's featured on Pawn Stars is actually the poster we're using for this director's cut, which is kind of
Right.
fun. So it did come full circle, even though it didn't see, we used a different one for the release. And we've actually on the Reagan Facebook page dropped some of the alternates along the way that we both had favorites that differed from what we ended up going with. And so excited for how some of this art will live and see the light of day. And for those of you that haven't seen, there's a really beautiful merch store out there to go check out, of just lots of merch designs that support this project. That's just turned out really great. But you and I have seen this project evolve through countless logos, posters, websites, screenings, revisions. What was the moment you finally realized this is happening? This is happening.
Yeah. Well, it was COVID. COVID. We were all lined up to go, and again, I had one of those moments where my co-producer John Sullivan called me and said, "I need a decision. What should we do? We're partially funded. COVID is now hitting big. What do you want us to do? Move forward or stop? Pause?" And I had some friends die on me, close friends. And I just thought to myself, how pathetic would I be if I died just before and because I paused this movie and decided not to go forward? And so I really said, let's go. I gave the command to go. And that was one of those key moments, in my life where in the past, I've had times when I didn't quite take those risks. And this time I said, let's do it. And so that decision meant we were shooting in the middle of COVID, which no sane person was doing at the time. But we were there in Oklahoma and we had to shut down twice. It cost us about $2 million in extra costs to shoot during COVID. But in retrospect, I'm glad we did. But that was the moment where I knew there was no turning back, and we were what do you call it? Damn the torpedoes, burn the sails. We're going, and there's no going back. So for better or for worse, that's how we went.
What's the quintessential moment that always pops up of that was cool in the whole process? I mean, I remember one time uh, walking out of a building in Nashville and ran into Guido. And nobody will
Hmm.
know who that
Hmm.
is sitting here, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah,
And he
our
said,
friend.
"Come with me." And next thing you know, I was in a room with Mustaine. And I'm just like, that night when I laid in the hotel, I was like, today was cool. That was cool. Didn't see that day coming. And I'm
Hmm.
sure you had a few of those along the way. What would that have been throughout this project? It
I
may
think
be an unexpected connection, maybe even.
Yeah, certainly getting Bob and Jean was really an unexpected, God wink. That was really cool. And we're going to do some things together in the future too. But I would say having the movie premiere at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood, this was a legendary location. And then, yeah, the things I think about are Dennis Quaid saying it's the favorite film of his career. He's been in
Yeah.
152 movies. And, that's a lot. That's The Right Stuff. That's The Rookie. Talking about some of the classics of American cinema. So for him to say that, and then I would say also Michael Reagan, Reagan's son. He came to the premiere, and I've known Michael for 20 years, but I'm a little bit nervous because Mike was the adopted son of Reagan and his first wife Jane. And let me just say that Jane doesn't come across in this movie, as you guys have figured out by now, having seen it, doesn't come across as the nicest soul. And we had to be honest. And I talked to people, and like, yeah, she was not very nice. I talked to a lady who worked at a store, and she came in and was kind of curt with her. And anyway, so we portrayed her accurately in the film. And so I'm just dreading the call from Mike afterwards, saying, "How dare you treat my mom like that?"
Right.
And that's what I'm expecting. And he calls me up and he's like, "Yeah, you pretty much nailed her. That's exactly how she was." And he said, one time after President Reagan gave a speech, he said, I called up my mom and I said, "Mom, wasn't that a great speech that Dad gave, calling his ex-wife?" And he said, my mom said, "Honey, I didn't like those speeches 40 years ago and I don't like them now." But she voted for him twice. So, but to have Mike, and the other thing that Mike said, he passed away after the film came out, but the thing that really rings in my ears as a filmmaker, when you're dealing with somebody, a public figure, he said, "If only my brother and sister will watch this movie, they will finally understand Dad." I
Mm.
thought that's about as good as it gets.
So true. It's the polar opposites. Uh, I can't close this out without talking about the author side of your life. You've mentioned it a few times in this interview. You've offered numerous books in the music category. You've always been good to get them to me as they've come out, you know, just a slew of books, over the years. I mean, it's a journey. This man is an author. You've been a part of so many different books. You've now got this, and you've alluded to this. We can't wrap this up without talking about this. You and I got together at Starbucks. You brought this to me back in December. Tell the people about this book. I think it's incredible. And
I,
there's the
s-
photo he
I
talked about.
I signed that for you. If I ever see that on eBay someday, I'm gonna to Ron. I'm gonna come after you. Maybe your kids will sell it one day. No, yeah, thanks. I was kind of taking notes along the way, and as crazy things would happen, I'd make a mental note of it, and then I just decided at some point, yeah, I'm going to write this book, and it's much more of a memoir than my other books are more books about the music scene or this and that, but this was a very personal book about success and failure, a lot of failure in the book, a lot of pondering, is God really in this? Did I make a mistake? Correction. I had a friend of mine who was very, very charismatic and Pentecostal call and say, there's somebody on this movie that's a problem, like has to be thrown overboard. And I'm like, well, that's just me at this point. So I guess I'm the problem. And things like that make you doubt what you're doing. And the interactions with talent. At one point, Nicolas Cage was going to play Reagan. And he and I went back and forth for a year. We had meetings, and then he pulled out. So all the ups and downs along the way that I, again, may discourage somebody from being a filmmaker. I'm only kidding. Hopefully it'll be more inspirational that there is a divine plan and you have to just keep following the river and don't give up.
So you and I, we talk usually every Monday night. We have a standing together time, and it's wonderful. But you've spent years telling Reagan's story and President Reagan's story. Uh, you can't probably play all your hand, but what's the next impossible story you're chasing that you can talk about? We've talked about so many. I've got your film slate in front of me. So what can you talk about or allude to that's next around the horizon?
Yeah, I just think that there are so many great stories in the American pantheon. I, as you know, was born and raised overseas. Even though my parents were Americans, I grew up in Japan. And so I love America. When we were kids, we loved to go to the American military base, get a cheeseburger and a Reese's peanut butter cup and a milkshake, which they didn't have at the time outside. And we were like, we were like people like peering in to the American military base and saying that we love it so much, we love America. So I bring that love for my country that maybe people that are native born don't always have. So there's so many great stories that make up this country, and we need to tell those stories, and we haven't really told them very well. Think of all the great people in history, from Edison to Lindbergh to Babe Ruth. Just all these great, interesting people that make up America. George Washington, our founding fathers. We really don't tell their stories well. We tell all kinds of crazy, weird stories of weird people and off base, whatever. But yeah, we have so many great stories to tell, and that's who we are. In a lot of ways, Reagan is a collection of all the things he heard and saw in the American songbook, if you will. He would grab that idea and grab this idea and grab that idea, and he made them his own. You may think of Reagan as this great tax cutter, but he stole that idea in 1978 from a guy named Jude Wanniski, and he made it his own. That if you cut taxes, it helps the economy, things like that. He's the amalgamation of America. And so anyway, all that to say that there are so many great stories to be told, and whether it's rock stars like we talked about earlier, or founding fathers, or people who invented things along the way, there's a lot of great stories to be told, and I hope we can do that in the future.
Well, I'm looking forward to that journey ahead. Mark, thank you for giving us a deeper view. More importantly, thank you for the friendship over the last 3 decades and for allowing me and my team to be part of this incredible journey bringing Reagan to life. So be blessed, my brother, and looking forward to what's ahead.
And thank you all. Thank you, Ron, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight. We're just gearing up, and I hope you had a great 4th of July weekend as you're in the middle of it. And yeah, and please tell your friends about September 18th. Hopefully we'll be somewhere near you there in town. But if nothing else, I hope you enjoyed it tonight. And I hope it inspires you that you can do great things too. And you may suffer setbacks. You may be having the kind of setbacks that Reagan had. But there's another act for you as well.
Wonderful. We'll talk soon, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks you guys.